All right, welcome back to the Roast It Yourself podcast brought to you by Coffee Bean Corral and Current Crop Roasting Shop. I'm Stephen Burnett with Coffee Bean Corral in Jackson, Mississippi. And with me is Catherine Mansell. With me in person, in real life, with the hound dogs, you'll be able to hear them a little bit, is Catherine Mansell, certified Q grader and director of Current Crop Roasting Shop in New Orleans, Louisiana. How are you today, Catherine?
My hound dog does not like this barrier.
Oh, well, maybe we can move it and see. We'll see.
We'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. Come on, bud. There we go. Here we go. Each week, we accommodate hound dogs and dogs of every variety, and we set aside about 10 minutes to field questions from home coffee roasters and professionals alike about roasting, tasting, and most importantly, enjoying coffee. You can send your questions to questions@riypod.com. That's questions@riypod.com to get a nice shout out from us in an upcoming episode, and of course, to get your question answered. I said we are in person today. Catherine, why are we in person today? What brought us together on this occasion?
We went to the Jackson Tennis Club and did a demo for a bunch of folks up there this morning. So we do all sorts of classes in New Orleans, and you do some upstairs here when folks come
Occasionally, yeah,
through.
yeah.
Yeah. So
They usually
John,
call and say, "Is Catherine there to do a class?" And I say, "No, she's in." They say, "Thanks," and they hang up. All right.
well, John knows a bunch of these folks over at the tennis club, and they really wanted to see what we've been doing. So
Uh,
we did a demo up there with them, had
oh
lunch.
man,
It was
it was
great.
outstanding. It was such good lunch. I felt like I was like, "What are we?" I almost forgot why we were there.
Right.
I got lost in the meatloaf
Yeah.
and in the lemon squares. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So anyway, yeah. But besides that, we actually have a question from a listener, Al, from West Milford, New Jersey, who writes, "Hi, I have two questions. One, I've heard Catherine talk about secondary defects in coffee. What are they, and are there primary defects? And two, you talk a lot about fresh roasts, the roasting brand. I have a Behmor. I roast 10.1 ounces. That point one is vital, by the way. If you're roasting not point one, you're in trouble. 10.1 ounces on the 1 pound setting. I use the A setting and the default P1 profile. I've played with the different settings and profiles. Other than adding more time to the roast, I haven't noticed much difference in flavor. Am I missing out? More discussion on the Behmor would be most appreciated. I had a fresh roast a long time on the Beam. Sorry, I had a fresh roast a long time ago, and I prefer to make larger roast in the Behmor. Thanks, Al from West Milford, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks, Al.
thanks, Al. Appreciate it.
I got
Catherine, what do you think
excited.
about that? Yeah, I know you did. I
I
know
did.
you did.
I
Like
got excited.
defects, defects.
Defects are a part of the queue. Grain grading is a part of uh, anybody that's roasting coffee. You want to give your coffee a visual look through, check out things before you really get to roasting. But to answer the question, yes, there are secondary defects and primary defects. So I'm going to go through them and just explain to what they are, if Lulu will let me, and then we'll get to the part about the B more. So. Most of the time, you won't see any of these primary defects. They are normally gone before they even get to us here at Coffee Bean Corral. And that goes from different processing methods and the quality control at the farm. But there are 6 primary defects. The first one is a full black, and that's the entire bean is solid black. So you can't really miss those. You'll have a full sour bean where the beans look almost orange, like they have this dark orange hue to them, almost like they're
Hmm.
covered in rust.
Hmm.
Uh, a dried cherry or a pod. So that's the actual cherry that surrounds the coffee bean.
It
Uh,
just got missed.
just got
Yeah,
mist
when they
going
were
through
hulling it.
everything.
Yeah.
You'll have a fungus damaged bean where there'll be this yellowish or brown sort of semicircle on the bean. You'll have foreign matter, which is sticks, stones, coins. I found a Yemeni coin one
Hmm.
year when we were breaking down a bag here.
My favorite is the dried kernel of corn that pops in the roaster. So is that first crack? No, it's popcorn.
Nope, that's
So
popcorn. Give a nice little toasty taste, everything.
yeah.
Um, So after you get into foreign matter, you get into insect damage. Now,
Hmm.
this is something that every person has to deal with. Insect damage. Coffee is an agricultural product.
Hmm.
There are pests that really like to get in there and eat the sweet
They like
fruit.
coffee as much as we
They
do.
do.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
severe insect damage is you won't see just one or two holes in the bean. You'll see quite extensive damage where it literally looks like something ate
Hmm.
the bean. And you can't really miss
No,
those. They're
no.
quite apparent, and you'll see those. Hopefully, you'll never see those.
Right.
Uh,
Ideally. But
but
it does happen. And I feel like that's more common in like organically grown coffees where they can't and don't use certain pesticides
yeah,
that, you're making a trade-off
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Definitely see that. And if you have quite a number of those in, say, a 220-gram sample or 8 ounces, you'll have this very musty, earthy, in a bad way sort
Mm.
of taste to your coffee.
Mhm.
And in smaller amounts, they won't so much affect it in a way that it overtakes the cup, but a number of them in one sample can yield a not a great cup of
Right,
coffee.
right. Which is why they're defects. They're
Right.
not little treats in the bottom of the box. They're
Right.
defects and they
Right.
can impact flavor. I think there's a lot to be said about this though, because some people they see any imperfection in a coffee bean and they assume, well, this is a bad
Right.
lot. And
Yeah.
it's like, wait a minute. I mean, if you're in coffee roasting and green, working with green coffee, you're going to be sorting some coffee,
Yeah.
no matter what level you're at.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll get some and we open the box and we're like, whoa, this is a lot. This is bad. And so we'll
Mhm.
call our suppliers or the farms. We'll work out something with them to figure
Yeah.
that out. But it's common to have a couple of things, that you pick out. And I just, if it looks weird, sometimes I'll pull it out.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Ugly beans
hmm.
are not defects.
No, no.
That's the biggest
Just like
thing.
ugly people. They're not defects either. No, thankfully. Thankfully.
During my very first class, my Q Essentials course at the Crown uh, in Oakland, I my first sort of green grading test or lesson, the number of beans that I pulled out of my sample to say that they were defects, the instructor came around and was like, "How is there this many?" And I said, "Well, look at it. It just doesn't look right."
Right,
And he was like, "Well, it's not a defect. It's just an ugly bean.
right,
Not every piece of corn is beautiful,
right.
but it's still a good bean. So you have to really kind of know what you're looking for and be aware of what you're seeing to be able to really go in and pull them out. And sometimes if I see one and I know it's not something that is classified as a defect, but I have a weird feeling about, I just pull it
Hmm. Yeah.
out. So there are a smaller amount of primary defects, more so than there are secondary defects. So six primary, there are 10 secondary defects. So, I mentioned a full black as a primary defect. A partial black bean is a secondary defect. So if half of that bean is just solid black, that's a secondary defect. A partial sour bean. So again, the full sour bean was the bean completely covered
Hmm.
in that orange sort of dark hue. A partial sour bean is going to be just half of that bean or a part of it that has that orange sort of hue to it. Then you go into parchment. So that's partially or fully enclosed in dried parchment, and this is a normal thing that happens when you are drying your beans after processing. They already have this thick protective layer of parchment to
Right.
keep them safe and secure as they're drying, and then all of that is shelled before it gets to the final stage. But sometimes it's missed. But it can kind of mess up your roast because there's something encased
Right.
inside it that what you're really looking for. So parchment is a secondary defect. A floater looks like a monsoon Malabar bean that hasn't been
Yeah,
roasted
yeah,
yet.
yeah,
Just that swollen sort of really light colored,
yeah.
white, maybe sometimes yellowish bean. Um,
Really stands out against the other
it
ones.
does, and
Yeah.
it doesn't weigh as much as the others too, which I think is where the name comes through. So you
Mhm.
can take, a handful of these beans and throw them in water, and the floater will float all the
Mhm.
way up to the top, and you'll know that it's a
Yeah.
defect. Then you have an immature or unripe bean. So they're underdeveloped with and sort of greenish with traces of silver skin attached. They're just not fully mature. Then you have a withered bean, and the bean looks like it has
It does.
wrinkles.
It's like you put your toe in the water too long.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it looks like. Like a
Uh,
raisin.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like a raisin.
Yeah.
I've really seen one in the past few years. And then recently I got a sample from uh, a country and a farm that I've never bought coffee from before. And I was going through and grain grading before I roasted, and I look, come in, everybody! It's a withered bean. You can actually see the one with wrinkles. But it was the first time I had seen that in a long time, so you don't really see those very often. Then you have a shell, which you can call an elephant ear. So it
Mm-hmm.
looks like a bean was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks sort of like an
It's hollowed out.
empty,
Yeah.
a hollowed out bean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Um, and then broken chipped cut is also a secondary defect, and this can happen a lot in processing. That fruit that is around the actual coffee bean is really hard to get off.
Yeah.
Even if, if you put that coffee cherry in your mouth, even getting it off with your skin, I mean, with your teeth and your tongue is really hard
Right.
to do. So it takes a
Yeah.
lot of work to really clean those beans thoroughly.
And you haven't got
Um,
the mucilage off there either. That's on there thick too. So it's still a whole, yeah.
yeah, just sort of
And I think
stuck
you
on
see
there.
more of this with like some like the wet hold coffees
Hmm.
that they just they go through a lot,
They do.
They
They
have
go
they
through a
it's
lot. So
yeah,
bumping
yeah.
up into things and going through mechanical processing plant, you'll see some of the broken, chipped cut. Um, and then a hull or a husk is another
Mhm.
one, and it's just part of that dried coffee cherry. So not that full pod that we said earlier, but part of it that's
Mhm.
still on there. And then the last one is slight insect damage, where this is where you'll see one, maybe two of those perfect
Mhm.
circles.
Yeah.
And that's a slight insect damage. So the secondary defects, you need quite a number of them to classify it as one. So
Mhm.
if I think it's anywhere between 10 or 15 slight insect damage,
Mhm.
that would equal one defect.
Right.
So in the secondary, you need a lot of those secondary defects to become one
Right.
defect.
Right.
So it's a little
And does
bit
that take
different.
one is this 1 point off of a score, right?
Um,
Or is it related to that at all?
well, you're only supposed to have category one defects allowed in specialty grade samples are zero.
Mhm.
So it's not supposed to have any of
So if you get one of
those
those, it's not
primary.
specialty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think secondary defects are less than five
Okay.
secondary defects in a
Okay.
sample,
In
and that's
specialty.
for the world.
Right.
I
Well, and I had talked to someone at Coffee Festival in NOLA, and I don't know, but they were talking about how they're looking into increasing that even more for
think.
stuff like slight insect damage.
Hmm.
It's so prevalent, and it really doesn't markedly affect the end result in the
Right.
cup.
Yeah.
So they're looking at increasing those numbers of what counts as a full defect
Yeah.
from some of these things because we're learning every day what actually makes impact and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And insect damage, it's kind of like when you learn that in your box of Cheerios, there's a certain amount of like bug parts and rat
Right.
poop that's
Right.
acceptable, and you're like, what do you
Sure.
mean acceptable,
Right.
right? Um, and with coffee, you just have to remember, okay, I'm going to put this in a roaster at like 450 or 500 degrees for
Hmm.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's going to totally change this bean, like
Yeah.
it chemically change this bean. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But, and then one other, did you talk about Quakers?
No, I didn't talk about Quakers and roasted coffee.
Yeah.
No, I was
Yeah.
just talking about just the
The
green
green
coffee.
defects. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That,
But look over your coffee after you do roast it. And the Quakers, the real severe ones are like they just don't roast. They're
yeah.
very obviously like way under roasted.
Yeah.
They'll stand out like a sore thumb. Pull
Yeah.
those out.
Just
Those
pick
will
them
affect the
out.
flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. And every time I've had, even if I have maybe one or two, it depends on how I'm brewing my coffee. If I'll actually be able to pick up that there's something in there, it's
mhm.
always a good idea to just go ahead and pull them out. But as I'm going through and tasting coffee, The only way I've been able to taste that is with quite a number of them
Right.
in there.
Right.
So, there are, some folks that talk about Quakers uh, just really ruining their cup of coffee.
Right.
One Quaker and a 200-gram sample ruining their coffee, and all I think is, I need their palate.
Yeah, I need to be
I must,
that on point. Right,
I
right.
must have
Right.
palate. I'm not
That's a good
there
point.
yet.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but there's a lot of information on primary and secondary defects out there. Specialty
We'll put a
Coffee
link to a
Association.
chart with all of this because
Yes.
they've got
Yeah.
pictures of all this stuff. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there, and there's a second question
The
here. We're
Be More.
running a bit long. So what do you think about
Yes.
the Be More?
Actually, over the past couple of months, that current crop the Behmor has kind of been pushing its way
Mm-hmm.
out into people in the shop because it's becoming, November and December, and everybody who's gotten into roasted coffee, they know how great roasted coffee
Right.
is for
Right, right.
gifts over
Like
the
fresh roasted.
holidays.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I've had folks come in and go, okay, so, but I need to just have more capacity.
Yep.
What can I do? And of course, all I want to say is you should get the bullet, but
Right.
not everybody is ready for that
Right.
price tag.
Right. Not that much. Yeah.
So the Be More really fits in. Um, the way that when I first got into roasting coffee, that was the first
Mm,
roaster I was gonna, learn how to
sure.
roast coffee on. So I grabbed the manual out, had never roasted coffee, and I started reading it, and all I thought was, this feels like it was written in another language. So I didn't get any of the common roasting terms. I didn't really
Right.
understand what it was talking about at all. So I just put it away.
Yeah.
And I put the manual away for a solid at least a year or so and started roasting on everything else. And when I finally had the general understanding of what the common terms were and what all of the words meant, I went back to
Mm-hmm.
it, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
The man who invented the Be More, Joe Beam, will
Great
even
guy.
tell you,
Great
yeah,
guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. He'll even
Yeah.
tell you people make this roaster a lot more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah.
But the way I hit 1 pound P1 start.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always that's always where I start. And it takes a little bit uh, of you know, failed roast and experimenting with the
Mm-hmm.
roaster for you to figure out how it works. But the cool down phase actually finishes your roast.
Right.
So when you go in there, and I like the 10 ounces that I was putting in there. I usually don't put more than maybe 14 ounces in there just because it gets a nice even roast if you put
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit less. Um, and I'm waiting until I hear, within the first 10 seconds of the first crack, if I hit cool down, it'll be a light roast by the time the cool down phase is
Yeah.
finished.
Yeah.
Um, but it yields really nice even roast when you have your set profile that you're using.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the Be More.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I think people, I had a guy that bought one and he was asking me what settings for this coffee, what settings for that coffee, and I just kept telling him the same thing over and over again. I 1 pound P1 start
yeah.
because it's a longer roast anyway.
Mhm.
And to me, whatever coffee I've got, if it's a longer roast anyway, I want it to be as quick as the Be More can do it.
Right.
So I'm giving it everything she's got, Captain. That kind
Mhm.
of thing. So
Yeah.
but I mean, then you're just watching and you're smelling and you're listening and you're keeping track like you would any other roaster. But
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of settings on there. Some people get really, really into it. I
Yeah.
wonder how much those different settings impact the end result.
Right.
Because I can roast any coffee we've got in the Be More with
Mhm.
just that simple setting and then watching it and adding time as needed
Yeah.
to get the color I want.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's one of those that's underrated, and I think it is overcomplicated.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great roaster for people that want that one
Yeah,
pound
it has
capacity.
a built-in smoke suppression
Yeah,
too. So
yeah.
as you're roasting, you're not seeing any of that smoke. The only time
The
it sort
fan
of
kicks
lets it
on.
out,
Yeah.
yeah, when you hit the cool down phase, it sort of mushrooms up and goes.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's a great roaster, if you're worried about roasting coffee and having so much smoke in your house or
Mm-hmm.
in your garage because you have it more specific on when you're going to start
Yeah.
seeing that smoke so you
You
can be more
still
prepared
should
for it.
roast in a ventilated area.
100%.
Yes.
Always roast in a
Always.
ventilated
That's
area.
it.
Yeah.
But it's a nice feature.
Yes.
All right. Well, this was a long one, but I
Yeah.
think it was a good one. So
Yes.
we're not upset about this at all.
No.
Let's see here. But yeah, so that is our answer, Al. We hope that was helpful to
Yes.
you and everyone looking at Behmor did not sponsor this, but maybe they should. Maybe Joe should write us a check for all of this talk about the Behmor. But yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for the question. Catherine, we left something out. It's
Sure.
right here. It's on the tip of my
Yeah.
head,
It's
and I
right
don't
here.
know. Yeah, it's right there. We'll get it out. But y'all, if we can't, y'all should definitely get it out. Put in the comments the things that we missed, what we got wrong, what we could have said better. This
Mhm.
nuance thing that we didn't split correctly. Fine, let us all have it. Okay, let's
Mhm.
make this whole community better and more knowledgeable about coffee and about
Yes.
roasting. That's what we're here to do. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, which
Mhm.
is quite a lot.
So much
Quite a
better
lot.
while I'm in town.
So much
So
better.
much
Yes,
better.
the internet separates it. It connects and separates at the same time, and we don't
Yes.
like that as much. But this is great.
Mhm.
Uh, Big thanks to Josh Santmeyer, our audio video wizard, who is going to cut this up into pieces and edit it into the thing that we're going to put out tomorrow. So
Tomorrow.
last minute.
Yes.
Yeah, Josh, you're the man.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jatavian Walker, for the work you do on the graphics. You guys do a ton of work, and we really appreciate it. Remember to send your questions to questions@riypod.com
Mhm.
and about coffee roasting, coffee tasting, anything to do, green defects. We'll talk about that again.
Mhm.
Thank you for enduring a longer than normal episode. Otherwise, have a great day and happy roasting.
Thanks, y'all.